SSM NSC CAN 50216. These are IRG meeting minutes for the February 13th meeting. And at page 12, we'll find the report to government that you commissioned, Mr. Vigneault, when you learned that the government was considering the invocation of the Act. And you've mentioned elsewhere in your evidence, I think it's now well understood by the Commission and the parties, that as you learned that the government was considering the invocation of the Emergencies Act, a concern that you had because of your understanding of the IMVE space, and feel free to join in, Ms. Tessier, if you want to add here. The concern was that the invocation of the Act actually had the potential to, I think the word inflame is used, but to raise the temperature and actually increase the risk of a threat of serious violence. Is that right?
Yes, it is. And this is really when, we feel that it is our responsibility, a little bit like when Ms. Khan walked me through through another of the assessment in relation to the flags. We have experts, we have people inside the organizations that, really well understand those dynamics. And in this context was to make sure that the government, yes, within the confine of the reflection on the invocation of the Emergencies Act, but also more broadly about what is happening in the country and how could the dynamic change. We felt it was important that we took that expertise within the service and we shared that more broadly with partners, with the government, so that everybody had that understanding that we had at the service. So it is within that spirit, so both in the context of the Emergencies Act, but also in the context of what we see, what could potentially see in Canada.
Right. So if I understand the purpose of this report, it was to alert the government to a potential movement in the threat environment. And by that, I'll tell you what I'm trying to get at. You weren't, by offering this assessment or deciding to do the assessment, concluding that the government itself was, by invoking the Act, engaging in activities that posed a threat to the security of Canada.
No, absolutely not. It was really much, again, based on the expertise and understanding of the IMV milieu, is to see how some of these elements can be interpreted. And Ms. Conner asked us earlier about disinformation, misinformation, and that would be a good example of how some objective decision could be misconstrued deliberately or not, and what is the impact on potential threat activity in Canada. So that really was the spirit in which we produced that document.
Right, and this document, perhaps also in the spirit of things we see in your annual reports or some of your reports to Parliament, CSIS sometimes prepares reports to government related to threats to the security of Canada that aren't actually premised on the commencement of an investigation based on reasonable grounds that the activity poses a threat, but it's simply advice to the government, a report to the government on threat-related issues, correct?
Yes, it essentially is to use the expertise, the knowledge, and to try to bring a level of understanding or bring a light into very complex dynamic issues that are, in the case of IMVE, fast evolving in our country. So we try to bring that level of understanding, yes. Okay,
and if we can go back then, Mr. Clerk, to the public summary, that's WTS 6079, and just wrap up the chronology and indeed this examination by going to page 7 of that summary. We're now at the stage where the Act has been invoked, and the point I understand you to be making in the paragraph that begins, Mr. Vigneault explained, the point being that after revocation, you continued to provide input both to partner agencies and to cabinet through the IRG about the evolution of the protests, the blockades, et cetera, the convoy. So you're continuing to give input proactively, but you weren't actually asked the question.
About. And as a learning organizations, we try to make sure that we learn from the past and that we are trying to come with the best possible assessment on an ongoing basis.
Right. So you said something earlier, and I was just trying to write it down as you said it, but something to the effect that CSIS mobilized whatever resources it could in order to try and understand the Freedom Convoy protest. Is that right?
Something similar to that. Yeah, I would say it's accurate, yes.
Okay. So you've talked a bit about the potential for a lone wolf threat. Now, am I correct in thinking that that's not based off of particular intelligence? It's more of a conclusion from general principles about this kind of an event?
This is based on expert analysis by CSIS, by ITAC, and other organizations that to understand the dynamic environment in where violent rhetoric can push individuals to act. And unfortunately, we've seen a number of people who were not on the radar of anyone who were consuming this type of information and indeed, a committed act of terrorism or extreme violence. So we are, unfortunately,
apparently global, and others are working on stories. Maybe we see how those land. Now, I'm going to ask the same question again. At that point, are there a bunch of political staffers essentially planning to create a national security issue or make one look like it is?
Mr. Commissioner, I will have the same answer. There's a lot of information just been put to us for the first time. There are acronyms that were mentioned. I don't know what they refer to. And I think, I could speak to information I'm aware of, privy to, but unfortunately not this one, Council.
So are you aware of the LRB, what it is? You are, aren't you?
Not the specific acronym, maybe if you spell it out.
Liberal Research Bureau.
Yeah, I know about the Liberal Research Bureau.
All right. And so is it fair to say that it's kind of strange that the political branch would have the Liberal Research Bureau doing research on protesters with respect to these concerns they're raising, as opposed to yourselves who are the National Security Agency?
Mr. Commissioner, I would say that, this is not something that would be of interest to CSIS. As my colleagues and I have testified, we very much, since the beginning, mid-January on, we've been looking at these issues and the developments and potential threat to the security of Canada based on the CSIS Act. So we would not be looking necessarily for what other parties would be involved in this context.
Okay, can we go to document ssm.can.00006358 underscore rel.0001? Okay, can we just scroll to the bottom to the first email, please? Okay, so this email is from January 27th, okay? And it's an email between, again, more political staffers. It begins with Carolyn Williams. She's the Director of Parliamentary Affairs at the Privy Council. You're aware of that?
No, I do not know Karen Williams.
And what about Zita Estrava, the Chief of Staff to the Minister?
About the presence of flags and some of the meaning of those flags. And so I can go back to our analysis, what we've described then. I'd be happy to, if you want to refer me back to the document, speak to that.
Okay.
Concept.
If, Mr. Clerk, if you could just go back to my examination aid, this shouldn't be an issue. It's a paragraph 16, just scroll right down to it.
So, Mr. Commissioner, just for your information, this is the document that the DOJ has an outstanding
Yes.
objection over.
And if we can go to paragraph 16.
Mr. Commissioner, we've already objected to this document being put up.
I understand, but I'm going to ask for a ruling on the commissioner to put this page to them. So let's deal with that if we
Well,
can. So if we can put up
Just a
page
second.
16 again.
And what is page 16?
Or paragraph 16 is just the two pictures of the first post in time at 10:13 a.m. on January 28th, 2022, of the spotting of a Confederate flag. And there's also a license plate number. If you'd like me to go through and bring up all of the documents, I'm just trying to get this done quicker, sir. If I,
Well, you're way over time already.
I
so
understand, but I'm not,
just-
this is so important, sir, that I need more time to get through this area. It is extraordinarily important.
Well, so far asking a bunch of questions
Right.
to people who have no knowledge of the documents or
I
the
understand.
information.
I understand. So-
Is not, I'm
Yeah.
trying to explain something. And I know you're frustrated but that's not good use of your time. And reading into the record, that exchange of texts was done days ago. And again, that's not a good use. So I'm just, I'm trying to be patient, and I understand you want to get something done. So let's try and work together to figure out how we can navigate this in a appropriate way.
Okay.
So you want to put up a picture of a license plate that's in relativity?
Yes.
Okay, and I think your co-counsel has the number for that, the relativity number, so we can, I'm guessing.
Yes, Mr. Commissioner,
Okay.
from my understanding, Mr. Miller would like to first put up a tweet of Ariel Trusser that shows the image of the license and then the license. So we'll
Right.
call up the number HRF, so POE.HRF 6021.
Okay, so I think that's okay, Mr. McKinnon, we're just putting up the picture for what it's worth. We'll see what it is.
We've gone to page 16 with respect, and it's not just a picture.
We're not
But
putting up
that's it.
page
We're-
16.
We've moved on, Mr. McKinnon, so,
If it's just the picture, that's fine.
okay, so that's what I think we're doing, so I'm just, let's try and get through this.
Okay, so, sir, this is my first understanding that this was the first post in time that I can find with respect to when a Confederate flag or a Nazi flag appeared. And it's at 10:13 a.m. on January 28th of 2022. And it's posted by Ariel Troster. Do you know who she is?
I do not.
You're not aware that she's the new counselor that replaced Counselor McKenney?
I do not know who the individual is.
All right, and so then if I could just bring up the closer photo with respect to the license plate, please, and that actually is at page 43 of the examination book of authorities. That'll just be easier for you, Mr. And it's been clear, so online, that license plate number is BL, then it's got a crown in the middle, is 3, and I can literally tell you what it is, and people were trying to look it up. It's viewable. Did at any time CSIS do an investigation into who that license plate holder was?
Mr. Commissioner, I do not have the specific knowledge of this, and even if I had specific knowledge, we would not be at liberty to disclose specific
Right.
details. That's why there was an in-camera session with the Commissioner and Council.
Okay, and so the next document then would be second, please. The next document is the one that comes after in the examination aid, and it is the January 29th being POEHRF 0000000024.
Okay, you're going to have to wrap up, though. If these are just pictures you're putting up, you
Right.
can put it up with any witness.
I understand. So the next time a Nazi flag or a swastika or what have you appears,
The next time you've found it. I mean,
Right,
I think.
right. The next time, so you knew about the situation where Conservative Party Member of Parliament, Mr. Cooper, he was giving an interview and this upside down Canada flag with the swastika appeared. Are you aware of that?
I remember something to that effect. I've not researched this recently, but I recall something to that effect, yes.
Okay, could I now bring up POEH.HRF 00000026? Okay, so this is the post from a fella by the name of You Skip Pop, unidentified on Reddit. He posted at 3:12 p.m. And it's, from my understanding, the first time that the Nazi flag photo appears. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that, and I'm not seeing
Yeah, it's just
anything other
I'm just
than,
trying
you
to
know,
get through it. And then there is the issue with respect to that, that no one was able to identify this gentleman. And I believe there's a close-up photo of my friend, Ms. Well, I'm just going to, if we're going to run out of time, is this. Were you aware that the first time that the picture of the gentleman all covered in army fatigues with a mask over his face, walking with a Confederate flag through a crowd, it first appeared in an opinion piece in the Toronto Star from someone who actually works for the Liberal Party of Canada? Were you aware of that?
Mr. Commissioner, my friend seems to be giving evidence now.
I'm asking if he's
Well,
aware of
he
it.
asked a question, and I can guess at what the answer is
Right.
going to
Right,
be.
okay,
Right.
but there's a presupposition of a fact that's not a.
Yeah,
that's not an evidence.
because you keep interrupting me when I'm trying to ask questions and I'm
No,
running out of time.
Just, please. Okay.
So
I'm not aware of the articles, and I'm not aware of those facts that you mentioned.
Right.
I'm sorry.
are you aware of a company called Enterprise Canada?
Not specifically, no.
And have you identified the individual, one that is, it was all over the news, the gentleman that was carrying the Nazi flag? Have you identified him yet?
Mr. Commissioner, as I've said before, the specific details of our investigations have been shared, with Commission earlier. I would not be able to go into more specific details.
So I think that's it.
Right, yeah, no, and I
Thank
take
you.
it, then, sir, that you know that individual was Brian Fox from Enterprise Group.
I have not said anything of that respect, Council. I have not testified to that, Council.
Yeah, you haven't testified to it, but you know that to be true, don't you?
So you would say it was a complete and logical response, but it was unfortunate in that you weren't able to deliver anything.
My strong preference would have been to help Alberta.
Yeah. Now, moving chronologically through events to the consideration of the Emergencies Act as it came up, you participated in the SS.
Know what are you going to do with those resources, correct?
Yes, sir.
And one of the things Deputy Chief Bell said at the time was that the OPP were asking for the same thing. And then Minister Mendocino said, we need to know from the chief what the plan is with the appropriate boundaries on operational independence. How is the convoy being broken up and disengaged? And then he added, we need to know the plan. And I take it you would agree with that.
Respectfully, sir, I don't believe I needed to know all of the operational details of the plan. I needed simply to be satisfied that the police services that would be contributing to its execution would be involved in the plan and be satisfied with its sufficiency. But I did not ask for details of the operational plan.
Right. So what you needed was the RCMP and the OPP to say they were satisfied with the operational plans.
When we were asking them to bring significant resources to bear, my understanding from them is that they also wanted to be satisfied to the sufficiency of the plan.
And the subject of the Ottawa Police Service not having a fully developed operational plan came up several times during the period prior to the Emergencies Act invocation. Is that right? And
Yes, sir, I think that's fair. We had heard it from a number of police officials. There was some general discussion about the plan.
Right. One of the comments I see that was made, and this may sound familiar, was when they showed up, there was no or let me turn to the document. Mr. Clerk, if you could please turn up ssm.can.ns 402674. And if you could turn to the first page of that, please. And so this is from Ms. Astravas, and in it, that's your chief of staff, correct?
That's correct.
And so she indicates there's an operational update as to what the RCMP were reporting. RCMP Integrated Planning Cell was set up to assess OPS operational plan. I do have concern. Strategic Tactical Planners, OPP, OPS, RCMP were identified to be part of that planning cell to review, challenge, and provide plan. When they showed up, there was no plan to review. Slowly later, verbally shared plan was not taking feedback or challenge, no open discussion on way forward. And I take it, Minister, if those statements are true, those actions by the chief would be problematic. Is that fair?
And again, I'm reluctant to comment on Chief Slowly's involvement in this thing. This is the information we were receiving back from the RCMP and to me through my chief of staff about concerns that they had. But again, not being part of this discussion, I'm reluctant to characterize anybody's particular behavior on this. But it's very clear that the RCMP had concerns.
And in fact, in text messages with your chief of staff, one of the things we see that you saying is we still need to fairly clarify what is he going to do with these resources. If it's just more inaction, the OPP and other Ontario police services will sit this one out. Do you recall that exchange?
Yeah, I do. I in my conversations with a number of police officials outside of the city, there was concern. They wanted to see an integrated operational plan that involves an action to end the blockades or end the protest.
And in another email exchange with your chief of staff, you also indicated, and that was the one I think that Mr. Miller just took you to, as long as the city and the police refuse to do anything, no progress will be possible, correct?
There was a concern. We were hearing from both the RCMP and the OPP that they wanted to see an action plan for the resolution of the protests.
You talked about the importance of communication with the protesters and the style of communication. I take it you wouldn't disagree with me that...
No longer hold that position.
All right, fair enough. I'll move on. I've only got a couple of minutes left here. In your capacity as a politician, as a cabinet minister, of course, you're no longer in the room, the police room, so that you're no longer having a direct look at the intelligence reports. You have to rely on your federal law enforcement advisors, various agencies, to advise you what the situation is, correct?
Yes, sir. I have been regularly briefed by, for example, the National Security Intelligence Advisor, the RCMP Commissioner, and the Director of CSIS, but I don't have any line of sight into the raw intelligence or many of the reports.
And you rely on those agencies and the National Security Advisor to give you credible and reliable information so that you can make informed decisions as a cabinet minister?
Yes, sir.
Now, you mentioned you had never heard of Project Hendon, and nor would you have had any reason to, correct?
I was not familiar with that. Subsequently, after other information came out, particularly through testimony, I've heard the phrase, but at the time I was not familiar with that portfolio of intelligence.
All right, now we know from the Hendon reports, and we've looked at this in some detail, that as early as January the 20th, which is a week before the protests started to arrive, that the OPP had warned in its reports that this may not be a short protest. You've probably heard some of that evidence.
Yes, sir.
That there was no exit strategy and that at least some protesters intended to stay until their demands were met, correct?
I've heard that subsequently.
Right.
There was conflicting information and intelligence that was being made available to me prior to the arrival of the protests in Ottawa. But, quite frankly, there was also open source reporting that some intended to remain.
Right. As a decision maker,
Some of them were also deployed in a number of functions that, as I understood it, that were dispersed from the downtown core.
But you, and on your witness statement anyway, sir, which I understand you've adopted, you said one of the main reasons was that there was not a firm operational plan in place.
And that's true, Mr. Champ. There was a concern that we were hearing from not just the RCMP, but other police services, that they wanted confidence that an operational action plan was in place before they were able to deploy the resources.
And you would have agreed with me, sir, that it would have been important for that information to be shared by someone in some way with the Ottawa Police Services Board?
I'm going to object. This is, again, Alyssa Tompkins. Chair Deans, in her witness statement.
Are you familiar with the Section 2 CSIS Act definition of a threat to the security of Canada?
Yes.
CSIS themselves advised Cabinet that the protests didn't pose a Section 2 CSIS Act threat. You were aware of their assessment, weren't you?
But I think context is really important, sir.
Sure.
The advice that I understood from CSIS is that it did not meet the CSIS threshold for them to enable them to initiate an investigation. And they were very clear about that. But for the purposes of the Emergencies Act, that definition, I believe, has a broader application that is contained within that definition. And it really, the violence and the threat of violence, I believe very clearly the threat of violence. I also believe that, the threat of violence existed. And I also believe that the threshold for, in that definition is different for the Emergencies Act than it was in the very narrow application of that definition to enable the CSIS to undertake an investigation.
All right.
I was previously the minister responsible for CSIS. I'm not unfamiliar with the extensive jurisprudence and very high standards that exists for CSIS to take that action.
In the
Folks, if you want to be kept up to date on what's happening at the Emergency Act inquiry, including my live tweets and some clips and highlights that occurring at the Emergency Act inquiry, by heading over to revolutionnews.ca/Emergency Act Commission. That's revolutionnews.ca/Emergency Act Commission. And of course, here folks, while you're there, please head over to donorbox.org/Emergency Act Commission. That's donorbox.org/Emergency Act Commission. And of course, here folks, if you could chip in a buck or two, that will be greatly appreciated, as it will help me cover my travel expenses, including my expenses on food, as bringing you these stories doesn't come for free. Thank you so much.